Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our first webinar in April, I believe. Excited to get an update on ATEX. They put out some phenomenal exploration results since we last had them on, so looking forward to digging into those. If anyone's not familiar with ATEX, I would recommend looking at one of the previous webinars just to get a full overview. I think we'll do a quick overview and then jump into recent results and Q&A. So as always, we will accept questions. Feel free to enter them in the question box at the bottom of the screen. And this presentation will contain forward-looking statements. If you'd like to know more about those, you can find them on the presentation on their website, which was just updated today for the session. So feel free to check that out. And with that boring stuff out of the way, I'd like to introduce Ben Pullinger, SVP Geology and Business Development, and of course, my colleague Magda Gardner, who's going to help with the Q&A. Ben, thanks for joining us again.
My pleasure. It's always great to be here, and thanks for hosting this for us.
Yeah, great. Excited to get an update on the results you put out last week. So maybe if you want to do a quick overview and just jump into those results.
Absolutely. Thanks very much. Yeah, it's really been a pretty good start to the year for ATEX. A couple of milestones to talk on here and touch on. Obviously, coming number 3 in mining in the TSX Venture 50 was pretty exciting for us. You can see the strong performance we've had, especially since we started our phase 2 drill program over here. Getting the capital together, getting the right contractors in, then getting on the ground drilling, and having put out a few results. Obviously, culminating in the result we put out last Thursday, really building some solid momentum in the stock. We're still sitting on a very healthy cash balance now of just under 10 million Canadian. Thankfully, we've had some warrants and stuff that have been trickling in that have helped us to fund exploration as we get through to the end of this field season here. And we're in really good shape with 3 or 4 more holes to come out before the end of the program here, and looking forward to hopefully maintaining the momentum that we've been able to build so far. Again, just to touch base, over the last 6 months as well, in terms of exciting things that have happened, we've built up a very good following of kind of institutional support and research on the back of that. All of those guys having upgraded their targets over the last little while to match the results. So really, people are seeing the significance of these results and seeing the potential value that gets added. So I would encourage people to have a look at those if they have access to that. Just a quick reminder of and I guess the last thing to say is this is now out of date, even though we updated it yesterday. We've hit our 52-week high again. I think we're sitting at about 62 right now. So really getting that momentum is being maintained and going strong. Really just back to kind of an overview. I think it's important to just give a little context here and to think back. It was a year ago really that we were drilling our first kind of proof of concept hole at ATEX, and we've been able to move very quickly subsequent to that. And I think a lot of that is to do with the people around the story, seasoned veteran explorers who've done this before in this part of the world. And like the project itself, I think when you see the drill results and you see the quality and the length of mineralization, the intersections that we're getting, the quality of the project really helps in terms of our ability to move forward at a rapid pace as well. I like to just stop and look at this image here because it does provide a lot of context for later on. Again, what we're exploring for here is a high quality underground bulk mineable, block cavable operation in Chile. And when you see kind of the lay of the land here, this gives a very good landscape for how that plays itself out. We drill from the top of this ridge here, which is 500 meters above the valley. This valley is 50 to 80 meters wide. Our camp sits down here in this valley, and the mineralization, the top of mineralization at ATEX at Valeriano starts about 200 meters below the bottom of this valley. But the scale here is pretty impressive when you think of the fact that that's over 500 meters high. Again, just in terms of location, we're located on this green belt here, what we call the link belt. And a really interesting analog for that would have to be, what we're doing here between El Encierro, which is an Antofagasta-Barrick joint venture, who are our immediate neighbors to the north, and Valeriano is what's happening up at the northern end of this belt. NGEx, who really was like the architect of initial exploration in this part of Chile, announced some exploration results across the border in Argentina today. They've been exploring this for over a decade, and today put out among their best drill results ever. the point I'm trying to make with that is when you look at the fact that Jose Maria, Philo spun out of NGEX and NGEX is still going, you've created a lot of value in that porphyry cluster there in an area that's being explored for over a decade, well over a decade with continuous exploration. You know, ATEX, this is our first year going at Valeriano. We've already made, you know, significant progress. But I think as Raymond, our CEO, would say, you know, our best holes and our worst holes are still ahead of us. But, you know, we think that, you know, continuous exploration and exploration dollars invested into the projects in this part of the world, in this link belt, are going to continue to generate positive results. And seeing those results come out of NGEX today, I think is very encouraging about, you know, the reward and continuous exploration here. Just a little refresher on this. You know, this is the ridge that runs down the center of this area here. This is the El Encierro, the shape of the El Encierro deposit, which is that joint venture between Antofagasta and Barrick. They're currently drilling here, but we can see 3 rigs. We have 3 rigs turning our property, and this is, you know, that western ridge that we saw in the image earlier on. Just going to flip ahead to results for now and skip this, and just really focus again on, you know, the quality of the result that we put out last week. Hole 11B, a phenomenal hole. More incredible about it is, you know, it's back on the following up on 11A, 2 holes of the same color. You know, being able to drill quickly, extend holes, and come out of old holes is really something that is new to the story with the drill contractors that we brought in, be able to drill directional drilling. But the result of that is they're being able to put out 1,342 meters at 0.73. But even more impressively, I think within that is 1,000 meters plus 1,000 meters of consistent 0.8 copper equivalent mineralization, which really gives a very good insight into the quality of the grade and the continuity of this. And speaking of continuity, I think if you look at all these results down here now, which are the collection of other results that have gone into the porphyry interface, all of them are at that 1,000, at or near to that 1,000 meters of vertical mineralization. All of them are in that grade. The grade and length of mineralization here is so consistent. They all end in mineralization as well. And all of these holes would have made it into this table. And really, it just speaks to, I think, one of the most important things about this story is consistency, continuity, and repeatability of the mineralization in this system. You know, just to recap and talk about the history and the evolution here. These are the 3 holes originally drilled by Hochschild, who had the project in 2011, 2012, through to 2014 when the discovery was made. They dropped the project, it went back and was lost in the sands of time. Our advisors and Raymond ultimately, who came in as CEO and had picked this up for Hochschild and come up with the concept of the porphyry back in that time. Really hit the ball, got the ball rolling. Pierre came in and supported the concept, the proof of concept drilling. That capital was raised at the end of 2021. And then coming into 2022, we got to follow up for the first time on these 3 holes that were drilled by Hochschild. Hole 17, a 200-meter step out to the south, was proof of concept. Hole 19, which unfortunately was stopped short of target because of a drill error, again showed the system was open to the north. And subsequent to that, we've been able to come back in 2023, finish up hole 11A, show that central trend is open, to start to show critical mass on, you know, one trend. And then based on what we've seen in the top of 11A and 11, be able to then bang out hole 11B, which is now the longest intersection on the project to date, and discover another porphyry trend. And why this is really important is because if you think of this as we talked about earlier, an underground block caving operation, you want to be able to start in your highest grade mineralization first, because that brings back your payback, that brings that juices your project economics. And from there, you can pay back your projects and draw on longer term, lower grade, but still pretty good grade in the 0.6 to 0.8 realm, copper equivalent realm for your life of mine. So we've really been focused on defining these kind of higher grade trends that you see initially on the central trend, now the western trend, and currently drilling to see if we can find the eastern trend as well, which we know exists. So we have hit porphyry in hole 16 and seen some indications of a high up of the top of that zone on the eastern zone here. Again, what's really important is, you know, hole 11B is the furthest western hole on the property to date. So not only is the property open along strike, as you can see here, this is a long section of the western trend, where hole 23 is in progress right now, hole 24 between hole 9 and hole 11B, open in both directions, but it's also open to the east and the west. which you can see here. We really haven't drilled further east of hole 16, and it did start to get into pretty interesting mineralization in the breccias above. We have no idea what's happening over here. We have no idea what happens once we cross over the ridge onto the western side of the project. And that becomes interesting when you look at where all of the L and Sierra mineralization sits in this area as well. So just on this slide, what we're looking at is just a snapshot of the Valeriano concession, the bottom end of the Valeriano concession, the alteration zone that sits over the two of these projects. And this is why we talk about this as a district or a porphyry cluster. This alteration zone is 12 kilometers long, about 3 kilometers wide, and already hosts these two projects. But going back to my initial point about hole 11A and B, is they are the westernmost holes in the property. We've now pushed the boundary out to this ridge, and all of Alan Sierra's mineralization, 2 kilometers for 2.5 billion tons of global inventory, is still on the western side of the ridge. So that obviously that gives us a natural target for expansion out to the west. We also know that Alan Sierra is drilling over on the eastern side of this ridge as well. And to date, we've only really tested 1 kilometer of our 5.5 kilometers of strike length here. So we believe there's a significant amount of space for this project to grow, for new discoveries to be made. And every hole that we drill, we're learning more and finding more. So, the project, as I mentioned earlier, is being rewarded with every dollar of exploration that we put into it. We're finding new and exciting stuff as we go. And really, the final thing to just talk about before we jump into the Q&A here is this is what it's all about. I think we're very fortunate custodians of a spectacular project, but this is the world needs in terms of high quality, next generation copper projects. We also like the fact that this is going to be underground. We think a smaller footprint, high efficiency, big output is a better way to go. And if you look at this on a district scale, this is where Valeriano sat in 2020 when we put out the initial resource, which we'll likely be looking to update later this year. I would hope that we're, if you look at the average grades and the intersections that we've put out from hole 17 all the way through to now, that would probably be sitting somewhere up here. And again, this is copper, not copper equivalent. We're sitting somewhere out in here. Give us 10 years of exploration, or even 5 years of continuous exploration on the same kind of track that you've seen at Filo, that you saw at Jose Maria, you see it at NGEX, and see that consistent reward. We can see Valeriano moving out into this district. You then look at it on a consolidation basis, give L and Sierra a couple more years of exploration ahead of them, and really very soon you start to see this on a consolidated basis into this upper echelon of top tier copper projects in the world, and something that becomes very attractive and ultimately we think gets built. So I'll leave it there, and we can jump into Q&A and dive into any of the questions that anybody has, or we can talk more about anything that anybody else would like some more detail on.
Thank you. So just touching on your latest news from last week, a couple of questions about this latest intercept of over 1,300 meters of 0.7%, 0.73% copper equivalent. So size-wise, are you able to kind of say how this new trend to the west compares to the existing, more defined trend, the central trend?
That's a great question, and really that's what we're focusing on right now with hole 2023. So hole 23 and 24, which are currently in progress. And you're spot on, right? We have about 800, 900 meters of strike length now defined that we believe is open, and we hope to follow up on before the end of this program. But when you look at hole 9 here, and hole 9 was a very interesting hole because it never actually intersected porphyry, although it did hit really solid, consistent mineralization in the rockmill breccias, which are the breccias that are formed above the porphyry, which would indicate that porphyry has to be somewhere nearby to upgrade and to enrich that wall rock. So we know that somewhere over here in proximity to this 852 meter intersection at 0.65 copper equivalent, that that porphyry exists. We've got it now. We had 765 meters of it in hole 11B, and we drill into the north and south. So ultimately, we'd like to be able to come back and wrap up this season and show somewhere in the realms of 700 meters of strike length open on to the north and south, which starts to compare pretty favorably to that central trend. And when you start to wrap numbers around that in terms of in terms of kind of like width, scale, it gets pretty exciting pretty quickly, just as it did with the central trend.
Awesome, thank you. And then about the next question is about depth. So are you able to estimate how deep the mineralized parts in the western trend are compared to the depth of mineralization in the central trend?
Sure. I mean, so that was actually really interesting. We started getting into the rock mold breccias and the early mineralization at around 800 meters in hole 11 and hit the porphyry around 1400 meters. So again, we're still looking at the same situation where from the bottom of the valley, which would sit out here at 3,800 meters, you're looking at 200 to 300 meters below the bottom of the valley to get into mineralization. But I think significantly, if you go from look at where the bottom of the slope is to where the eastern trend is, you're looking at the western trend. Sorry, you're looking at 1,800 meters between the bottom of the valley over to that eastern trend. When you look at the central trend, you're looking at just over 2 kilometers. So I think not only is the depth an interesting factor, but also the further we can push mineralization to the west and the east as well, which is 1.6 kilometers actually from the top of the mineralization in 16 to the bottom of the valley there. The more you can push those out, the less infrastructure you would have to put in to be able to access this. And the depth that obviously, sitting just below the valley floor makes it easier to access the tunnel. You can drill it out and get to know it all the way down and then undercut at a level that makes sense and establish a future underground mine.
Got it. And then something very interesting that you've mentioned about the central trend is that high grade core around 0.8% copper equivalent. So is there similar potential for a core like that in the western trend?
We absolutely do believe that. And I think you saw that as well, right? So I mean, one of the challenges just on the places that we can access to drill right now is this hole ended up being very vertical, and we saw some really good zonation. And not only that, I've actually got a piece of it on my desk. We saw a lot more bornite, which is a higher temperature copper mineral, much more gold and stuff in the system too. And I think us being closer to the system and seeing the 1,010 meters at 0.8 copper equivalent and the 222 meters at 0.94, there definitely is a higher grade core to this. But we didn't get kind of as we did with hole 17 and 14, we didn't have the opportunity to get across that whole mineralized the whole kind of width of that porphyry and see that because we drilled pretty vertically. But I think once we are able to follow up and put more holes into this, I think you will see a better defined geometry on this higher grade zone within that western trend.
Awesome. And then so ATEX is the first to actually intercept the mineralized porphyry on that trend. Is that right?
No, so I mean, well, it's not. That's an interesting question because I don't really know. We don't really know too much about what's going on on Sierra other than they have porphyry mineralization, and anecdotally we know they hit a lot more kind of breccias and stuff. But I think when you talk about the early porphyry, which is what you see here, as opposed to kind of like these later porphyry dikes, which I think is what when we saw the presentation that was put on by Antofagasta last year at PDAC. A lot of their mineralization is more related to these younger cross-cutting features. This red, like our early porphyry body, I think is really the where you've got that continuity of that higher grade. And I think that's when we look over the ridge and we see where Antofagasta is drilling, we see that they've got 2 drill rigs over here with 1 rig over there. We speculate that that's the target that they're looking for as well, is trying to find that kind of porphyry that we've seen on our side, because it's quite possible that the mineralization that they've got here is associated with the emplacement of that early porphyry that you see on the western trend, which actually gives us an interesting exploration target over here. And again, I get the rough dimensions of this 1 kilometer based on their global inventory. It's 1 kilometer for 1 billion tons and what they're seeing there. So I mean, it's a bit of a rude number, but a crude approximation, but it gives you an idea of kind of if that is the case, what the potential targets would look like as we go west and east and north and south along strike. But yeah, to your point, we have these early porphyry trends, and we speculate that that's kind of what the guys at Allen Sierra are targeting with their drilling on the eastern side of the ridge. Got
it. And then switching to the central trend, so can you remind us of the dimensions that are outlined to date and the size of the high-grade core there?
Yeah, so in the high-grade core, with the central trend today, and remember that hole 19 goes over the top, so it didn't actually get into the high-grade trend, so it's still open to the top here, and we're actually looking to see if we can follow up on this by the end of this drill program, depending on how much time we have with another hole to the north here. But we're looking at about 800 meters to a kilometer of that central trend right now, and within that, it's anchored by 550 meters at 1.03%. On the southern end and in hole 17 through to the northern end, which intersected the 170 meters at 0.81% copper equivalent, and it's open to the north of that, with hole 14 in the middle as well, which is 272 at 1% copper equivalent. But I don't think it passed from the hang wall to the footwall, and I think there's an opportunity for a wider intersection there in the future that we'd look to test. So like if you put the initial numbers around that, if you look at kind of what the numbers that some of our analysts have thrown out there, and I have to say we've got some pretty pretty spot on analysis, I'd say, by the group of analysts that follow us. I'd say you're looking in that like 1 to 200 million ton range of 0.8 plus, which will give you an average grade of between 9 and 0.9 and 1% copper equivalent. I think based on their analysis, that would be what you'd need to really get your payback established, and then anything on the back of that is kind of like life of mine production. So to have that on that central trend, I think we can wave our arms around that. We're getting towards critical mass there based on those dimensions, and then to be able to start to see something like that again shaping up on the western trend. It really changes the dynamic of the project and kind of the risk profile as well, if you were to approach it from a mining perspective, having multiple ways to phase this into production.
And what's the depth that you're drilling down to right now?
So our deepest hole to date is hole 11. And it was stopped because, as with hole 11, A and B, both were stopped as we approached the limits of the drill rigs. I mean, hole 11A finished up at 30 meters at 0.74, seeing the grade improve as it was getting over to the eastern side. Hole 11B finished at 6.5 meters at 1.3% copper equivalent. So we know there's some grade down there, but the deepest hole now we've drilled is hole 11B, which was 2,190 meters, and I think a record for a junior in this part of the world. So, and again, like can't say enough good things about our contractor. Recon Drilling is a subsidiary of Geodrill. They've been able to bang out back-to-back 2 kilometer deep holes, still getting 40 meters a day at those depths. Really professional outfit, and really as I said, a partner, not so much a contractor, as a partner in terms of allowing us to be able to execute pretty rapidly, because without the drill holes and without the drilling, we would not have been able to advance this project as quickly as we have. So, I think that's really part of the secret sauce here as well.
And then one last question from me before I turn it over to Deb. So I believe you're drilling with 3 rigs right now?
That's correct, yeah.
Where are they operating?
So one rig is sitting here on 22A, which is the daughter hole out of 22, which was also announced. And now's a good time to just talk about that as well, because as you can see, it was a hole that was put down between the 2 trends to give us the ability to access the eastern trend and the central trend, and still again put out another 1,000 meter intersection at 0.51% copper equivalent between those trends. So talking about the enrichment of the wall rock, there's a lot of copper in the system and coming through that. So that was actually better than we were anticipating. But yeah, so there's 1 drill rig sitting here on 22 and drilling 22A, and depending on timing when that finishes, hopefully 22B, which will go back towards the central trend. We've got 1 rig here at 23, which is just over 200 meters north of hole 11B, and then we have another rig here at 24, finishing that hole. We're drilling that hole as well. So 2 on the western trend, 1 testing the eastern trend, and then the central trend.
And we might have a technical question for you from the audience. Are you being guided along strike by any geophysical data sets, or confidently testing through drill step outs and alteration vectoring?
It's a good question. I mean, one of the first things that ATEX did on this project was an MT survey, which allowed us to see down to it's a resistivity methodology that allowed us to see down to about 2 kilometers, and within that we could see kind of like the ultra low resistivity at the top of the of the porphyry, transitioning down into lower resistivity, and it gave us a pretty big target. That initial target was 3 kilometers in diameter, from a depth of the top, basically here, all the way down. So we know that we're drilling within that, which obviously is very helpful. We have a couple of derivatives of that, an MVI model and a couple others that we use to guide us, which are deep penetrating. But again, the alteration at the top, where you've got the gold oxide resource versus the alteration down the middle here, is slightly different. But we do use a combination of that, the geophysics, the logging, the what we've seen in the logging, what we've seen in the MT. And then just we also overlay a couple other products like magnetics and stuff for structure. And then, that's how we've been picking these targets and stepping out.
So do you expect to continue using directional drilling going forward?
We absolutely do. And the simple answer to that is, we saved 1,500 meters of drilling and almost 2 months of time drilling holes 11A and 11B coming out of 11, which is a huge, which is a huge time saving for our exploration season. Now every other hole that we put in from surface becomes infrastructure for us in the future, because every hole that's there is a hole that we can now drill out of, a hole that we can leverage, and a hole that we can use to reduce our overall exploration cost.
All right, thank you. That's all the questions I had, but I think Deb has some more.
For sure. And I see some audience questions here. One of them is just asking about the status of the Chilean legislation that was somewhat anti-mining. Maybe you can just provide an update on what's going on in Chile geopolitically.
I mean, I don't think this is the forum to get that in too much detail, but what I can say is that there has been there were some hiccups with the new government, especially leading into the referendum last year, which was overwhelmingly rejected. 64% of the population voted against the new constitution and all that pertains to it. So we are still seeing that work through. We are still seeing, kind of like legislation debates. One of the most recent ones is obviously on the taxation and royalty structure. But all of that seems to be working itself out really well. We see the company maintaining kind of the status quo for the country, maintaining kind of the status quo for where things are. We are seeing kind of small changes being made to the way that permits need to be applied for, the length of time and length of consultation. But we still think that as far as having worked through all those, especially in the landscape of what you've seen happening in the rest of Latin America, from Panama around. We think that Chile is still the best place to be operating, to be exploring for, and ultimately building and permitting big copper mines.
And with the project located in South America, when do you expect to wrap up for the 2023 winter season?
So it's very much we're very much like in the kind of chicken and egg thing, where we're playing, how far can we get down in these drill holes versus when does the weather kick in. So we're hoping to be able to run into late May, potentially June. But there will definitely be a window around kind of like that cutoff date.
And what are your exploration plans for the next 12 months?
Yeah, so what we'd like to do is finish this program, get those results out, say June, July into August. Look to update, look at updating a resource, and then be drilling again by September. I saw one of the audience questions was about financing. Yes, at some point we will need to finance for that next program. We're looking at a 20 to 30,000 meter program for next year, pending pending capital, permitting, all that kind of stuff. But that would require us raising the order of 20 to 30 million US dollars, and that'll get us through to that next program. And then on the back of that, should the results continue to look the way that they are now, we'd like to advance that again and raise some more capital and go out with a bigger program on the back of that. So, a lot of drilling here to be done. Every time we drill, the system gets bigger, and when the system keeps getting bigger, it means you need to be able to drill more holes. So that would be the plan.
You said you had 10 million in cash currently?
That's correct, yeah.
And another shareholder question: you list 30% of stockholders as other sophisticated investors. Are these individuals or funds or other? Can you give some examples?
I mean, like without getting into too much detail, these are people that have been supporters of the story There are a range of like high net worth individuals that invest alongside our major shareholder Pierre, and smaller funds and family offices and stuff like that. They're all part. These are guys that have all been very supportive of the company since basically that first capital raise, and have continued to support on markets and buying in the last placement as well. So the range, like I said, family offices to high net worth, sophisticated individuals, but all kind of close to the story.
Would you consider me a sophisticated individual, Ben?
The most sophisticated, Deb.
Oh, thanks. That's pretty much it for me. Magda, did you have any other questions?
Not that I can think of right now.
Ben, was there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't cover? Oh, we got one in from the audience. Since there are other mines around, do you anticipate any infrastructure and water issues?
I wouldn't say I wouldn't call them issues. I would say the reality is infrastructure. These projects are infrastructure heavy, and they will need to be infrastructure at one point in the future. I think in Chile, the ultimate outcome here is these projects are going to need to be linked to the ocean by a water pipeline and a desalination. But in terms of electricity, road access, and all the other infrastructure things, we don't see them being a problem. This is Huasco. So the project stood about 150, 160 kilometers away from the ocean. Relencio and what it used to be called El Morro La Fortuna is the Nuevo Union joint venture. So that's a joint venture between Teck and Newmont, and something that they're looking to. If you go through their annual reports, they forecast these going into production in the 2030s. And they've got El Cerro and stuff up here. There's high tension power to Alto del Carmen, which is about 50 kilometers away. So power is not that far away. There's road access. And I think, this is me speculating here. I think there's a pathway, and what you always like to see is efficiency in things like this. I think there's a pathway that if all these projects are advancing at a similar rate, that there's a way to put infrastructure in here that everybody wins. I don't know what that looks like today, being our first year of exploration. So that's very forward looking, but I think, there's a scenario here that kind of pipeline or that kind of infrastructure would ultimately unlock a lot of opportunity for copper production and exploration in that area.
Got it. And I guess a good place to leave the session off is talking about catalysts. So you mentioned drill results and an updated resource. Is there anything else that investors can expect over the coming months?
It's it's a beautifully simple and straightforward story. Drill, updates. Talk about what all that drilling and that means in terms of the bigger picture, which will be that resource. Reload on capital and get back to work. Get back to drilling. And
what percentage or how many meters of your drill program are you still anticipating to release over the coming months?
We're probably looking at another 2, 4, 6, 7,000 meters to get us through to the end of the program. Yeah.
Okay, great. And are you guiding for a target for the resource update?
I think it's a little premature right now. I mean, I think what I would encourage people to do is just look at the dimensions and play with the numbers themselves. We've got a kilometer by a kilometer with a kilometer of vertical mineralization. The average SG is called it 2.6 to 2.7, which gives you a density, and then you can play with the grades on the two trends, because especially on the central trend will be a bit easier, but western trend is going to be more fun until we get some more drill holes into it. But I think if you look at those numbers, that envelope is pretty big, and you can define a lot of tons within that, and then it's just what the grade is that will ultimately become kind of where we guide the resource to.
Awesome. Well, that's it for me. Congratulations on the results, and looking forward to seeing some more of those. And thanks for taking the time to provide an update. If anyone's interested in a one-on-one or has any additional questions, feel free to reach out. And with that, until next time.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And thanks for hosting us.
Yeah, thanks everyone for participating.